Hey, Rob,
Hi,
you ready?
I am.
We got lots of people.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. We'll give them a couple seconds as people shift around.
Sounds good. Just let me know when I can share my screen and we'll get rolling.
Okay, that sounds good. I like your beard and your glasses right now. I think we could just go with that.
Well, there you go. Thank you. My wife doesn't care much for the whiskers, but
Mine was asking me if my resume was going to be for the mall Santa Claus, given how
oh, there you go.
So yeah, no, we'll give it 2 seconds here. And
There's Chuck with the
hi, Chuck. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. Okay, clean shaven. There we go, Rob. We look like a bunch of renegades with clean shaven.
I know.
All right. Well, I'll get this going here as we have people still kind of coming in and out, but it looks like we've got a full house. I'm going to start off with, this is usually my family reunion, and I'm sad that we're not all seeing each other in person, but I look forward to this event every year. I think I've been going for 22 years now. So I'm Chris Meehan with Stantec, which is a new name for Mod, but a bunch of familiar faces as Stantec joined forces with Wank last year. So we're rolling with a new name and still last in the sponsors, because instead of a W, we're an S. So we're still down wallowing around in the bottom here, but I'm excited to be here. I've enjoyed this conference, as I mentioned, many years. There's a lot of great things that people on this call do that I get the chance to work with, which I'm super excited about, and to learn about all of the great things that this group gets involved with and the difference we make in the landscape, because that's really what we're looking to do as a group and as an organization. Modeling and data was the key to any. Rob and Chuck, what they're going to present to us on getting better data. Not bad data is out there, but better data is always good. And so I'm excited to introduce Chuck Fritz. Chuck has been the executive director of the International Water Institute since 2000, where he works as an international board of directors to develop and implement applied watershed research and education. His primary professional interests empower watershed managers, all of you on the call here, to implement defensible solutions for regions' natural resource problem, which we all know the problems that face the Red River Valley, and they'll continue to go on, but need the smart people on this call to help address. Chuck's got a master's of science degree in natural resource management and a bachelor's degree in science and mathematics from North Dakota State University. And his counterpart, Rob Sipp, has a much more colorful introduction. I love this. I grew up on small grains and livestock farm in Norman County, Northwest Minnesota. Talk about hitting right in the heart of the Red River Valley here. He holds an MS, a BS, an AAS degrees in natural resources management. I think, Rob, you need a couple more there. Again, another bison from North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota. Rob has about 28 years of a combined experience at both local and state levels regarding water management, natural resources, environmental policy, implementation, and regulation. He is currently the executive director for the Red River Watershed Board, where he works to implement the vision of the organization. And with that, Rob, I will turn it over to you to grab the screen, and let's learn a little bit about all the LiDAR data you all are going to collect for the Red River Basin, and how it's all going to help us be a little bit smarter in what we do.
All right, great. Thank you. This will just take a moment here. Okay, can people see that?
I've got it. I see it, Rob.
I'm going to go to screen show. Okay, there we go. So this afternoon, Chuck and I are going to talk to you about the activities of the Red River Watershed Management Board and other partners, including the International Water Institute, regarding LiDAR data. And over the years, we've done a couple of LiDAR data collections, and kind of going back in history, the original LiDAR flight and data collection was done in 2008 and 2009. And going back a little bit farther in history before then, this is right around the big flood of 1997 in the Red River Basin. a lot of the local agency government and partners and stakeholders up there realized that they couldn't even put together a seamless map of the Red River Basin of Minnesota and North Dakota to help inform flood efforts, flood mitigation efforts, and to help just make decisions during emergencies and flood efforts. So that kind of prompted all the groups to come together. And Chuck's group was at the forefront of kind of pulling everybody together. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but because of the International Water Institute and the Red Board and a whole host of other partners, we pulled together and did the first ever LiDAR collection for the Red River Basin back in 2008 to 2009. And so we'll touch some on the technology back then, some of the costs, also some of the lessons learned, and then also kind of fast forwarding 2021, how did all that change regarding costs and technology, and where are we at right now, and how is the data being used by local units of government? And so with that, the next couple slides, I'll turn over to Chuck, and he'll talk a little bit about the International Water Institute and some of the other pieces of the presentation that are his. So go ahead, Chuck.
Thanks, Rob. And I see the presenter view on my computer. Is that right? Not that I have any notes to share, but I see the two slides, right? The one that's upcoming and the present one. I don't know how you change that.
That's correct, Chuck. Yeah.
Is that what we're supposed to? Is that what I'm supposed to see?
Probably not. You're probably supposed to just see the one. My
I think,
guess
Rob,
is,
you just click on present, not the presenter view, but you need to present, and I don't remember how to do that.
yep. So you'll go down to the bottom there, Rob.
Yep.
Grab that
Yeah.
one, the bottom here.
Let's see, I see normal view, slide
Right.
disorder,
And my silly,
Right, do that one, Rob.
yeah,
slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then click on the bottom there. There's, I think it's that, no, over that one.
yeah, right there.
No, that's not right either.
Huh.
Display settings up top.
Yeah, there you go.
This one.
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
Click that one.
All right.
you go.
Sorry about that.
All right. Well, I'll run through this, Rob, and then I guess I'm gonna have to tell you the advanced slides, right, too.
Yep.
Just a little background about the International Water Institute. It was formed after the 1997 flood, and our mission is kind of simple. Our job is twofold. I'll simplify it, right? The Institute was formed to do watershed research and watershed education. That's it. Some of you may or may not know about the Institute and some of the projects or the programs that we deliver, but we work on applied research issues here in the Red River Basin and elsewhere. My kind of purpose that I see for the Institute is to apply or to provide decision support tools for local resource managers to better manage water resources and natural resources. Just make better, more informed decisions. The Institute's education programs primarily are the ones you probably know about are River Watch, River of Dreams, and River Explorers. Those are kind of the two longstanding and core education programs that the Institute works with students across the Red River Basin in North Dakota and Minnesota to teach them about the watershed and understand their watershed and how it works in the context of other issues, right? For the last couple of years, I've been working pretty much with farmers in North Dakota and Minnesota on an ag stewardship program. You'll probably hear some more about that in future months, but what I'm here to talk about with Rob is this LiDAR. And just real quick, LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It's a technology that combines aircraft, computers, and lasers. And it's a technology that allows you to acquire very large areas, elevation data over very large areas that's highly accurate. And that's all that LiDAR is. Next slide, Rob. The first effort, which actually started, I think, probably in 1998, for those of you who were around or old enough to remember the 1997 flood, that was a huge event here in the Red River Basin. It was, I mean, I'll put it in the catastrophic category. It was a huge flood at the time, not the biggest. 2009 ended up being the biggest, but during that 1997 flood, we understood very quickly that we were hamstrung by a lack of information and a lack of data. The elevation data that we had available to us at that time, for the most part, consisted of the old USGS quad maps, which were 30 meters in elevation change, or 20. But the bottom line is those of you who have been to the Red River Basin understand that it's very flat. Oftentimes you have less than 1 foot of relief per mile. And that information was really woefully inadequate when we were trying to respond to that flood. So after the flood, there was a number of efforts and initiatives, federal, state, local, you name it, to try to figure out how we can mitigate damages from that flood. And really what came from that is this thing that we call the Red River Basin Mapping Initiative. The need for this was documented by the federal government, specifically the International Joint Commission, in an effort called the International Flood Mitigation Initiative. They basically charged the International Water Institute with trying to figure out how to acquire these elevation data sets. So over the period of almost 11 years, we kind of worked and figured out how to make this happen. But really the scope that we were looking at was the entire US portion of the Red River Basin, and all the abutting counties on the Minnesota side. You'll notice that the effort stopped at the international border, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about why that happened in a minute. But the first project in 2008 that went through 9 consisted of 15 local, state, and federal funding partners. And a little preface to slide next, or that's coming up here. I spent about 18 months coordinating and securing funding and partners for this project. It was a huge effort. Next slide, Rob. The specifications for this first collect, I'll start, maybe tell you a little story. We didn't even know what kind of data we were going to use to acquire, what kind of technology we were going to use to acquire these data. LiDAR was a very new or an emerging technology at the time. And I still remember back, it was right around during the flood, I saw a pilot project that was actually done up in Red Lake, at the tribe, and I was shown this data, which turned out to be LiDAR data. And at the time I was thinking, wow, wouldn't that be great if we could get these data everywhere? But back then, LiDAR was a very new technology. It was truly emerging. We didn't have any specifications like we have today. Rob will talk a little bit about the specifications. There are different quality levels you can get of LiDAR now, and it's a very structured method and process that's established to collect these data. But we kind of made it up as we went. We didn't know. We were talking to vendors and others who had knowledge of the LiDAR data, or how these data are collected. And we were kind of saying, hey, what's the best we can do, right? I mean, if we're going to shoot for the moon here and we're going to collect these data, what is the best accuracy that we could get? And really what it came down to is, back then we were looking at about 15 centimeter mean square error accuracy. We had a point density, it should be pulse density of, actually the spec at the time was 1 point every 1.4 meters. And that was the best that we could do back then. And I'll talk a little bit more about the products here in a minute, but I want to emphasize here that back in 2008, there was no standards. We were making it up as we went, and I had a committee and I worked with folks to try to figure this stuff out as we went. Next slide, Rob. The deliverables, which now are pretty much commonplace, I think they're pretty much the standard deliverables. Again, this is something that we came up with, right? But we had a deliverables. We wanted the raw data, and the raw data, again, it's LiDAR data, so it's point data. Each point has latitude, longitude, and then there's a classification, a parameter associated with that. We wanted that raw point cloud data. At the time, it was 8 terabytes large, the collection area that I showed you. And back in 2007-05, just the ability to handle that much data was problematic. We were spending $2,000 on hard drives that were half a terabyte in size. So we struggled with how we struggled with how to handle and manipulate these data. It worked, but it was a pretty huge challenge. We took those data and we created what we call what a digital elevation model, and our digital elevation model that exists now is a 1 meter square model. At the time, those data would support 2-foot contours. In addition to the collection of the raw point cloud, there's something called the hybrid intensity image. It's actually an image that looks very much like a black and white aerial photograph, but it's generated by those LiDAR data and I'll just leave it at that. And including with our first project, we did have some aerial imagery that we collected along the Red River corridor, and that was just the standard normal aerial imagery. We did set up a third-party quality assurance. And again, this is something that is now fairly standard. As a part of the project, there was an independent contractor whose job it was to establish an independent set of ground control points and to validate the quality of the data that we received from the vendor. So the job of the third-party quality assurance contractor was to basically say, yes, these data met the specifications as indicated by the vendor. And the last one was what we called it was a data disseminant archival system. And the reason we put that one, or the reason we did that, is because I knew that most people who would use these data, whether it's even engineers, probably not as much, but certainly water resource managers and the public, their ability to manipulate and use that raw point cloud data was limited. And so we had to create something online that would be able to take those information and put them into some kind of format that the public could use. And that really is our LiDAR viewer, which exists today. If you go to our website, it still is there, and that still exists. Next slide, Rob. So the cost was $5 million. Basically, it was half federal and half state, state and local, I should say. Again, there was 15 funding partners. Took me 18 months to assemble that. That was a heavy lift at the time. It was for this organization and for me personally, that was probably the most challenging thing I'll ever do in my career. So that was a tough thing. But the data collection, the LiDAR and imagery cost about $4 million. The third-party quality assurance was about $275. The online the tool, the web portal, turned out to be about $185,000, and then the project management and admin was about $540. But bottom line is, it worked out to about $96 per square mile back in 2000. I guess these would be 2009. Next slide, Rob. So the lessons learned. So I'm going to take a little time on this, and I want you guys to be clear, because what we're trying to do is apply those lessons learned in 2007, 8, and 9, and even before, as we were doing this, to what happened this year, just recently, right? First of all, as I said, the level of effort is high. I don't want anybody to think that doing this project or doing a project like this is something that can be undertaken lightly. It takes a lot of effort and commitment to make these projects work and be successful. The other thing I want to point out is that there was no formal mechanism to undertake a multi-jurisdictional or a basin project. In my opinion, LiDAR data should be acquired at basin scale, right? It makes no sense to me whatsoever to collect LiDAR data based on some political boundary. And again, this goes to the application that I look at for these data, which are maybe different. But to me, if I don't have a basin collection, right, if I don't have a basin boundary, really, the data doesn't do me any good. So that's kind of what the purpose, and one of the things that we really, really try to stress, and I've been doing it now for almost 10 years, stressing it, falling on deaf ears a lot, but I'm focused on basins, right? Watershed basins. There still isn't a formal funding mechanism to undertake these projects. And there doesn't seem sometimes to be a desire to undertake projects on a basin scale. This efficiency issue. What we did, because we didn't know any better, back in 2008, we said, okay, if we're going to do this, let's send out an RFP, right? Let's try to figure out who actually collects these data. And there weren't that many back in 2008 and 9, but we said, oh, let's send out a request for proposal and see what we get. There's advantages to that. First of all, it's a competitive bid process. So you can evaluate the proposals based not only on cost, but on the technical ability or the capacity of the entity to provide the project that you need. And really what we were focused on then, and when Rob and I started this project in the Red River Basin, we're focused on now, and that's efficiency, right? It's easier for us to have local control on this, and it's easier for us to management. And by doing that, we can be efficient. And the last one I want to talk about is turfism. Now, as I said, it took 18 months. There were local, state, and federal partners that I worked on for the funding. But as this project started to evolve, I'll place state and federal agencies into one of three categories, okay? And the first one is our assets. There were assets, and there was clearly one asset that I have to, and I wish he was still around. He's since retired, but Ron Wenzel, some of you are old enough to remember, he worked for the USGS at the time. Ron was a great supporter of what I was doing and greatly helpful in us being successful in that first LiDAR collect. The other categories I'll put the agencies into is inconsequential. They were there, but they really didn't help and they really didn't hurt. They were just there, right? I will say when we went to get funding for this project, that turned into a political process. So in other words, the funding that I got from the federal agencies and from the state came through earmarks through the legislature. Okay. So agencies, for the most part, inconsequential. There were some that were there, but the majority of the agencies, not the majority, and I won't name who they were, but it turned out to be a liability. They made life miserable for me and my board and us trying to do this. And I still don't understand why, but they were clearly not supportive. In fact, one agency sent a letter saying they recommended that we not do this. And that was in 2008 and 9. So it was a tough thing, but that turfism was a big, big issue that we had to overcome. And it was a hurdle, and it still is a hurdle today. Next slide, Rob.
All right.
This is you.
Yes, so I'll just give you kind of a brief overview of the Red Board without going into a lot of extra detail. But the Red Board was formed back in 1976 by the legislature. And we actually just had our 45th anniversary here in August. And amazingly enough, the board was formed, took the legislature about 3 weeks to have discussions and to pass the enabling legislation. So that happened pretty quick. I don't think that would happen as quickly today. And one of the main reasons for the Red Board being formed is just the frequent flooding in the Red River Basin and all the damages that came along with flooding. And local policymakers realized they needed to do something. So lo and behold, they started working with their legislators, and the Red Board was born. And so we are a joint powers board with 7 members up in the Red River Basin. There are 11 watershed districts, but 7 of those are members of us. We do have taxing authority. And over the 45 years, the board has helped fund or co-fund 60 flood projects that range from larger scale flood impoundments to city flood projects and other types of flood projects. And then we've also done about 300 farmstead ring dikes, and those have been funded through several different funding partners. And then on top of that, we have about another 12 or so flood projects in our funding process, and probably about another 12 or so water quality projects that are in our funding process. So before you know it, we'll have a map that'll have about close to 400 dots on it. So that's pretty exciting for us. So just kind of a quick overview on the Red Board. And if people do want more information about who we are and what we do and how the taxation works and other things that relate to that, I'd be more than happy to talk with you offline about that. So just a little rationale about, well, why did the Red Board look at updating this data and doing a new LiDAR data collection here in 2021? And this really all started last fall. My board president, John Finney, up in the Joe River Watershed District, was thinking about this, and he gave Chuck a call, and he said, hey, Chuck, well, what do we have to do to update this LiDAR data from 2008? And so Chuck and him started talking, and I think we maybe had our first conversation here about a year ago at one of the board meetings. And we kind of went through last winter just debating and having a little bit of information brought to the board. And, I think the best part about this was the board spent some time thinking through, how do we want to capture this data? How do we want to be efficient? How do we want to use taxpayer dollars wisely? And how do we want to get this work done? And I have to thank Chuck for all of his guidance. And, we learned a lot with the original LiDAR data collection all those years ago. And we kind of took those lessons learned and moved forward. And so, yeah, the data, the ability to capture data has changed significantly. Chuck talked about USGS specifications. Now there is a set of nationwide specifications that USGS uses. The technology, it's amazing. You know, over the weekend, I just got a new iPhone. I think it's the iPhone 13, and I would imagine the computing power of that little iPhone probably has a lot more horsepower than what computers had, you know, 12 to 15 years ago. And you're kind of looking at lessons learned too, regarding local capacity and efficiency. Now, fast forwarding, a lot of our watershed districts, or actually all of them, are using LiDAR data on a daily basis. They're using ArcMap and GIS tools. They're tapping into the IWI LiDAR viewer, and just a greater ability to use the technology to help inform decisions at the local level, whether it's for drainage projects, culvert sizing, planning, emergency related issues, you name it. It's just a wealth of information that can be used at the local level. And I'll just move ahead to the next slide here. So regarding our collection effort, we did collect about 20,000 square miles on the Minnesota side here. And the Minnesota side of the basin is about 30,000 acres. And so we had a few areas of the Red River Basin that were collected about a year ago to a year and a half ago. And then a couple other counties that were going to be participating next year in some LiDAR collection efforts, whether it be through FEMA, USGS, and the state of Minnesota, and or other state and federal partners. So that's kind of the map showing those counties and the watershed districts. And I'm going to, let's see, oh yes. So regarding the decision process, what I think was amazing about this is that the board approved doing an RFP back in March or so. And so we released that RFP April 1st, and we ended up receiving 10 responses at the end of April. And over the summer, we spent a month or so just going through those responses, conducting some interviews, scoring and ranking them, and then ultimately coming to the board in July. And the board said, yep, go ahead, let's get rolling on this. Let's start negotiating the contract. And then in the meantime, we spent the month of August just developing contracts with the counties and the watershed districts to collect the data and to include them in this whole process. And then in the month of September, the board actually approved a contract with the Sanborn Map Company Incorporated to actually conduct the LiDAR flight and to capture the raw LiDAR data. And then also a contract was approved with Chuck and the International Water Institute to develop all the LiDAR derived products. So from the standpoint of government efficiency, I think this is a pretty good example of how things can be done at the local level. Decisions can be made month to month, and 6 months is pretty amazing. So definitely got to thank the board for moving quickly on things like this. And again, people like Chuck and the people from Sanborn really help make the job a little bit easier by informing the board and being helpful in that whole process. So the cost was a little bit more than back in 2008 and 9, but total cost, including the capture of the raw LiDAR data and all the work that Sanborn had to do, plus also the development of all the raw or the LiDAR derived products through the International Water Institute, was about 2.3 million or $135 per square mile. And when you kind of compare that to other projects that have been done, it's really going to come down to what level of data are you going to collect. And I know the state of Minnesota typically collects QL level 1 data. And according to their information, the Central Mississippi Basin data collection was about $330 a square mile. And then North Dakota is currently working on a QL level 2 data collection effort, and that's about $235 per square mile. And just a reminder, the Red Board, this collection effort is at QL level 1. And so it's just interesting kind of seeing those costs and how that all shakes out. But, we feel pretty good about the 2.3 million and being able to keep costs checked and within reason. So lessons learned in 2021, actually, it's the exact same thing from what Chuck described. The level of effort is really high. Again, no formal funding mechanism. We did actually put a bill in the legislature back in just last spring, right before the legislature adjourned adjourned for the session. And we're not sure where that's going to go. More than likely, it won't go anywhere. But in the end, the board just said, look, we need to update this data, and we need to provide a service back to not only our member watershed districts, but also the taxpayers of the Red River Basin. And we need to do it efficiently. And again, we use that competitive bidding process that really helped us look at going from QL level 1 to 2. Originally, the board was looking at a QL level 2 data collection, but the price difference between level 1 and 2 was so minimal, the board just said, let's go for it and let's do level 1. So, and then there's that turfism issue that Chuck talked about. And I won't go into any more detail there at the moment, but it's real similar as to what Chuck went through all those years ago. And then project partners. So it's the Red Board and its membership, Buffalo Red River Watershed District, the Sandhill River Watershed District, and all those counties that are listed there. And so those are the groups that kind of came together, and it's been a real smooth process. The project team again is the Red Board, the Sanborn Mapping Company, and they've been great to work with. They've been real helpful. And then again, Chuck and the International Water Institute. And I know when we started going down this road, I knew a little bit about LiDAR, but with Chuck's help, I know a lot more now. So thank you, Chuck, for that. And Chuck and the Water Institute have been just great to work with, and we couldn't have done it without them. And then just deliverables. This is kind of it is the listing of all the deliverables. And one thing I'm real excited about is the farmstead ring dikes. Earlier, I mentioned that we've helped fund or co-fund 300 farmstead ring dikes on our side of the river, and we've never been able to put a map together. And so now finally we're going to be able to have a map that we can show with 300 dots plus our other flood projects. And that'll be a real powerful tool when we're out and about talking with legislators and other policymakers about the things that we're able to accomplish with our local partners and stakeholders. And Chuck, did you want to mention anything about any of the other deliverables or any other thoughts on anything on the screen there?
No, I will mention the huge hurdle that we had 15 years ago with data storage and dissemination. I mean, it was huge, you guys. And interestingly enough, that was, quote, free from the vendor. They're going to host and disseminate the data for free 3 years at no charge, which kind of speaks to the advancement in technology since 2009.
Yeah, good point, Chuck. And that's going to be a cost savings for us here in the next 3 years. And then Chuck mentioned earlier too, the existing LiDAR viewer will be updated. So if you haven't seen that, that's a great tool, a lot of good information on there, and I'd encourage you to check it out. And then regarding acquisition status, so the aerial portion, the actual raw LiDAR collection started on, I believe it was October 11th, and it only took them 29 days to complete, which was just unheard of. And the weather cooperated. I think there were a handful of rain days and a couple other delays, but amazingly enough, they were able to capture all that data in 29 days. They had 3 aircraft and crews capturing data. And you can see on the map there, the blocks that the data was collected in. And they had 72 total missions, and just amazing. And I know the folks from Sanborn told us, they said, look, this has not been the largest data collect that we've ever done, but still 20,000 square miles is pretty big. And they've never collected data this quickly. And it's just all because of the weather and the cooperation from Mother Nature on this. And they had adequate leaf off, and they actually started on the northern end of the Red River Basin and just moved south. And then as part of QA and QC, they're also collecting 800 ground control points, actual survey data, and they have a subcontractor doing that. And I think right around deer hunting here a couple weeks ago, around Ada, Norman County, we had about 3 to 5 inches of snow. And so that kind of put a hold on all that survey work, but I'd imagine they're at it right now. And so we're hoping that they get that survey data collected. I'm guessing it might be, the end of December if the weather holds, or maybe into the winter, but the weather will kind of factor into that. But other than that, it's been a good project, a lot of good cooperation from all of our partners, and I think we're available for questions now.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Chuck. I did see in the chat, John Rochline had a question here for you. So what was your deciding factors to determine that the data needed to be updated? Was it that the technology would provide more detailed information compared to the 2008, 2009 collect? Maybe one of you were able to answer that one.
Yeah, maybe.
You want me to start, Rob?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think one thing maybe was just all the changes on the landscape. That's probably one big factor. And just again, it gets back to the technology, the tools, better better imagery, better data, better information. And Chuck, you might have a couple other thoughts on that. So
Yeah,
go ahead, Chuck.
Hi, John. Long time no see. Yeah, that's right. I mean, the technology and the ability to acquire more and more higher resolution data. I mean, we're talking about degrees of better, maybe by 3 times better. I'm just talking about the number of points we can collect, which again, there's some technical issues why that's better. But really what struck me is the work that we were doing on a different project. We were using these LiDAR data to work with growers in North Dakota and Minnesota and it's related to our stewardship project, but we were basically looking at very detailed information. We were using the LiDAR data on specific fields in North Dakota and Minnesota, and we were working with growers, and it became very clear that just the work, even on individual fields that had been done since those data were acquired, I was astounded at how different, or I shouldn't say how different, how outdated that old LiDAR data was when we really started talking to growers who had been working those fields for so long, whether it's new drainage patterns, whether it's new culverts, whether it's work they did on the field. Almost any of the 60 fields or the 20 fields that we looked at, almost every one of them, we had to manipulate the LiDAR data to make it work. And that struck me. It's like, okay, there's been that many changes, we should probably reacquire.
Any other questions for the group? John has got one. How much additional ground truthing work will be needed with the new data prior to processing and still be relevant?
John's got history. Yeah, it is, that third-party QA process that we used in 2007, 8, and 9, we're going to actually use those old ground control points because that was independently set up. So we'll do some work to update that, and that's kind of what we're going to use to do the that's what we're going to do to use to QA these new data. So, I mean, I'm not sure what you're getting at here, but the one thing that we don't know yet is the work that we did post-processing. For example, the hydro-conditioned DEM, which I don't want to get into, but that's basically a product that we apply techniques to the digital elevation model to account for how water moves across the Earth's surface. You guys should all know this. LiDAR data doesn't know if there's a culvert, right? So you have to account for that, and we do something called hydro conditioning. What we don't know in these new LiDAR data, if that is whether or not the work that we did on the old data, whether we can just plop that on this new DEM. I mean, that's the question that we're going to have to figure out here, and that's the big question mark if we have to put the kind of effort in to conditioning this new data to the level of we don't know that yet. But
other questions? John was very complimentary, said thank you. Interesting to know how much has changed on the landscape, and I would agree with that. It's truly amazing how quickly it can change in the landscape. Well, maybe people are typing in questions. One question I had is you built on the 08, 09 LiDAR data. You're going to build on this data here in 21, 22. How do you see the process becoming probably more efficient? I mean, you mentioned kind of having the ground truthing points. I'm assuming you're probably going to look at doing this in 2030, 2031. Either one of you, just how do you see kind of like the benchmarking and just kind of like having it within certain brackets going forward?
Go ahead, Chuck, and then I'll follow up after that.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just the process of what you need to do before you acquire, right? And by what I mean, to me, as a person who is very cognizant of spending taxpayer dollars wisely, I will always suggest that you go through a competitive process to get the best possible price that you can. You know, one of the things that really prompted, and it was probably the discussion when John called me, but one of the things that prompted that discussion was North Dakota acquired QL2 data. And they basically started at the Red River, a mile in Minnesota, and they moved west. And I was and still am rather critical of that, because to me, again, those data are useless to us unless we can do it. If, you know, it's the basin boundary is what we're looking at, right?
Yeah. And
so that was probably the thing that really was prompted me to say, okay, we need to move now and we need to acquire now because North Dakota is doing it, right? But really what it came down to is, because of the way the Red Board works and the fact that it was a single partner who was funding it, we were able to, you know, 6 months from decision to implementation. If we would have done what I did last time, it would have taken 2 years to assemble the funding partnerships. And I mean, for some, it's maybe okay for it to take that amount of time, but for me, as I near retirement, let's get her done now.
Yeah, maybe to add on that too, I think, you know, the Red Board probably won't be able to afford to do this every 5 years or anything more frequently than that. And, you know, it's $2.3 million is nothing to sneeze at. So we need to be careful in how we plan for this in the future. And if we're looking at a strategy moving forward, maybe it's somewhere between every 5 and 10 years, but you know, that's something the board will have to wrestle with, and we'll hear definitely from our member watershed districts and our partners. And, you know, that's something we'll always be cognizant of. But, you know, on that funding note too, I think what we'd like to see from the state of Minnesota is a little bit more interaction and more communication about what the funding strategy is for the state of Minnesota and how we're able to tap into that, and how we can take the model that we have and kind of bring that to the state. And I know sometimes things work differently at the state and or federal government, but I think we need some assurance from other potential partners and agencies out there that, you know, we can get this done. But right now, you know, we went on our own and got this done, and we're moving forward.
Great. Another question here from Larry Cokehead. Have you performed any comparison to the satellite data NASA and USGS collect?
No, we did look at, there's a number of other satellite things, but really what it comes down to is to get the kind of elevation resolution that we need here in the Red River Basin because of the flat landscapes. I won't speak for certain, but as far as I know, they can't come close to the resolution that we can get from LiDAR.
Right. Another question we had here is, no, that was just John complimenting the two of you. I mean, you probably got enough compliments here
Thanks,
so far.
John.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Rob and Chuck? Big project, lots of, I'm sure, sleepless nights and problem solving that goes into it.
A couple.
Any other questions? Yeah. Well, at least you got here, Rob. Right. You got here at least. I guess another question is, as you look out to collect this data, what is the one thing you're excited about that you'll be able to do better with this data than you were in the 08-09 survey?
We'll go right.
Well,
Arkin.
I think our watershed districts are just excited to be able to have more accurate data. You know, it's not going to eliminate survey work, in the field survey work for engineering and so forth, but it's definitely going to provide better insights into project planning, one watershed, one plan, emergency planning. I just look at the whole drainage industry and agriculture. I mean, they're really excited for this data, especially when you start comparing that older data to now and what that means in efficiencies and cost savings. And again, I'm just so excited to be able to have a map and data to depict things like, well, where are all your ring dikes and how does that all come into play? And yeah, it's just an exciting time with all the technology.
Yeah, and for us, it's really related to PTMAP type outputs, the ability to better define where a conservation practice is feasible and how to estimate the efficiencies of those practices. That to me is very exciting. If we're going to meet, if it help us to set attainable water quality goals and then implement practices to try to attain those goals. That to me is what's exciting.
Sure.
We can do it better with these data than with the old data.
Great. Al?
Yeah, and Corey just sent something in the text, and he's right. I mean, also because we have the old data and the new data, we're going to be able to compare lateral movement of stream beds and things like that. It'll be very exciting to see how the landscape has changed from a hydrologic standpoint when we get these new data.
All right, we'll do one last round, call for questions. I see Maddie's popped up, so that's usually the cue card. I need to be quiet.
It's okay, we have some time.
Okay.
There's one more
Oh,
question.
here we go. Ross Mullen, which vertical datum was the LiDAR datum collected in? I understand there's a new vertical datum forthcoming that makes some significant corrections to the Red River Valley. And were the correction points adjusted based on the new vertical
That's a
datum?
great question. That question is so good, I'd have to yell across the door here to talk to Grit, my GIS person. These data will be delivered in UTM 15. I would have to ask her, but Grit May in my office would be able to answer those questions. But I know there is some new datum that are coming out, and there are some corrections. Sanborn, the vendor is aware of those and up to date, just like everything else. So I can't answer that question, but if you contact me, I'll talk to Grit and get you the answer.
Great. John, had to ask another question. You can't go quietly here. Here we go. What's the schedule on getting the new data for comparison and use?
Yeah, so Sanborn should be delivering data to us here after the first of the year. And I think probably sometime this spring, we should have that data. But then once Chuck and his crew gets it, it takes a little bit of time to kind of take the raw LiDAR data and put it into the useful product in the end. And Chuck, I think that's about 1.5 years, isn't it? Roughly.
For the hydro conditioned product, which will be the most time consuming, depending on what we have to do to it. But I can't remember. I think from the time the data are delivered for us to mosaic them into the watersheds and get those products ready, 2 to 6 months, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
So it should be summer of 2022.
So around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
John, is that fast enough for you? Any other questions?
Yeah, that's fast enough.
Thanks, John.
It's a lot faster than the initial go around was, and I applaud you guys for taking that on.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Well, you guys are getting lots of compliments on this work. Geez, good job. Any other questions? Otherwise, we make sure to thank Rob and Chuck for their presentation today. It's been very insightful, a huge project that makes my head hurt seeing all the components that are tied into it and the time process that's going to come along with it. But seeing no more questions, Rob, Chuck, thanks so much for what you're doing. It will make a difference on the landscape. It's a huge, as far as how we manage our water resources, to have that data. As I mentioned, as a modeler in long historic times, good data made a huge difference to know that you get the right answers and make a difference on the landscape. So with that, Chuck and Rob, thanks so much. Maddie, I think we're good as far as people could sign off right now, or do they stay on this line?
No, this session will be ending soon, but if you plan to attend the 2 p.m. session, which is called Tools for Implementing Your Comprehensive Watershed Management Plan, you can actually stay on this Zoom link. So thank you all so much for attending today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.